Welcome back. We're looking at a concept from Plato that might seem a little bit out there at first, but stay with us.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating, I promise. We're talking about this idea from Book 5 of Plato's Republic,
Right.
about philosophers being like the ideal rulers.
Philosopher Kings.
Philosopher kings, exactly.
It's important to remember here that we've been on this journey with Plato as he's been building this hypothetical ideal city, all very theoretical, and then he throws this curved ball.
Yeah.
Like, how could philosophers who are often seen as detached from the real world
Right?
be the best people to lead?
Yeah, it really is a head scratcher when you think about it. Philosophers, they're known for pondering big questions,
Yeah.
getting lost in thought.
Uh,
It doesn't exactly make you think, oh yeah, that guy should definitely be in charge.
yeah. Right off the bat, Plato acknowledges that actually putting this ideal city into practice may be impossible.
Yeah.
He uses this analogy of a painter creating a perfectly beautiful man.
Yeah.
Even if such a man doesn't exist in reality, the image can serve as a model.
So it's like setting this really high bar, knowing that we might not actually get there, but we
Yeah.
can still aim for it.
Precisely. And it's this idea of the ideal versus the practical that really sets the stage for what Socrates is about to say.
Oh, and he's not holding back here, like at all.
Oh.
You can just imagine, like picture the scene, Socrates in the middle of this like lively discussion,
Yeah.
and he just drops this bombshell
Yeah.
that could totally get him in hot water.
Yeah.
He basically says that the only way to truly end suffering is for philosophers to become kings.
Or he says maybe our current rulers need to undergo a serious philosophical transformation.
Right, yeah, it's like such a bold statement that, really raises the question of what even is leadership.
Yeah. And the text actually describes Glaucon, warning Socrates that people are going to come after him with pitchforks for saying this.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe there's a reason why philosophers aren't usually leading countries.
Right.
But all jokes aside, to even understand Socrates' point, we have to unpack what he even means by a philosopher. Is he talking about someone with a PhD, or is there something more to it than that?
So Plato actually uses this concept of a lover to illustrate what he means.
Okay.
He says a philosopher is a lover of something.
Okay.
But here's the key. They love the whole thing, not just parts of it.
Okay.
So they're driven by a really deep desire for understanding.
So it's when you're really passionate about something,
Yeah.
whether it's music or sports or even like collecting stamps, you want to know everything about it. You dive deep into all the history, the techniques, all that stuff.
Exactly. And Plato even gives this kind of playful example.
Okay.
Of someone who loves beauty.
They don't just appreciate one kind of beauty.
Okay.
They see beauty in everything.
Got it.
In nature, art.
Yeah.
And they recognize that beauty can take many forms.
Okay.
And for a philosopher, that love extends to all knowledge.
Wow.
They crave this deep understanding of the world and how things connect.
So then it makes you wonder, what if that kind of thinking was actually applied to leadership? What if leaders were driven by this insatiable curiosity, this desire to understand everything?
It's a really intriguing question.
Yeah.
And what Plato really forces us to grapple with, because he's not just saying that philosophers should be in charge because they're smart
Yeah.
or well-read. It's this very way of thinking that they have this deep love of knowledge is what makes them uniquely suited to lead.
So they're not just, accumulating information. They're actually using it to see things in a new way and connect the dots. Exactly. And that leads us to another important aspect of the philosopher, according to Plato.
Oh.
They're not content with just superficial appearances.
Yeah.
They want to see beneath the surface to understand the true essence of things.
There's this really great image in the text where Plato's talking about lovers seeing beauty even in someone with a snub nose.
Yes.
It's like they can see past those obvious flaws and recognize this beauty that might be underneath.
It's a really powerful analogy, and it speaks
Yeah.
to the philosopher's ability to discern truth from illusion.
Which, let's face it, it's a pretty valuable skill in any context, but especially in leadership.
Absolutely. But it also raises another question.
Yeah.
Okay, so philosophers, they think deeply, they see things others might miss,
Yeah.
but can they actually rule?
Can they handle the day-to-day demands of leadership?
Yeah.
Can they make those tough decisions?
Yeah. Can they manage resources, navigate the messy realities of politics? And this is where Plato leaves us hanging a bit.
Oh, really?
He acknowledges that people will have this very objection,
Uh-huh.
but he doesn't really answer it in this section of the Republic.
Maybe it was just too much for Socrates to tackle all at once.
Yeah, perhaps.
After all, he was already pushing the boundaries with this initial proposal.
Right.
But it leaves us with this very tantalizing question. Can the qualities that make a philosopher
Yes.
also make them a really effective leader? Yeah, it's funny because I think we often think about leadership in terms of those practical skills, being decisive and getting things done. But it sounds like Plato's saying there's something more to it than that.
He's not necessarily saying that philosophers should be like running for office
Right.
and giving speeches.
Right.
It's more about this way of thinking,
Okay.
a way of approaching problems and making decisions that prioritizes wisdom and truth above everything else.
So it's less about the outward appearance of power and more about the
Yes.
internal qualities of a leader.
Exactly. And one of the key qualities that Plato highlights is this lack of self-interest.
Oh?
A true philosopher, according to Plato, wouldn't be motivated by personal gain or ambition. They wouldn't be in it for the power or the fame.
Which is a radical idea
Yeah.
when you think about how leadership actually plays out in the real world.
It is, because what Plato is suggesting is that a philosopher king would be driven by a genuine desire to serve the common good,
Okay.
to create a just and harmonious society.
Uh-huh.
Their actions would be guided by principles, not by personal ambition.
So their love of knowledge would then extend to a love of their people and wanting to see them flourish.
Precisely. And because they're able to see beyond the surface, they wouldn't be easily swayed by popular opinion or short-term gains.
Right.
They'd be able to make those tough long-term decisions that often get pushed aside in the pursuit of immediate results.
It's interesting because it seems like that kind of leadership requires a certain level of detachment.
Yes.
Like a willingness to go against the grain, to challenge the status quo,
Yeah.
even if it means being unpopular.
Yes. And Plato argues that this is precisely where the philosopher's unique perspective comes in.
Okay.
They are not afraid to question assumptions, to challenge conventional wisdom, to seek the best possible solution, even if those solutions are unconventional or unpopular.
That's a leader that I think a lot of people would love to see more of.
Right.
But let's be real here for a second. Does this kind of leadership actually exist?
Yeah.
I mean, are there any examples of like philosopher kings, throughout history?
It's a difficult question. Some might point to figures like Marcus Aurelius,
Okay.
the Roman emperor,
Right.
who was also a Stoic philosopher.
Yeah.
And his writings, particularly his meditations,
Okay.
really reveal a leader who was deeply concerned with justice and virtue
Okay.
and the well-being of his people.
So maybe he wasn't like a perfect example of Plato's ideal,
Right.
but at least he, embodied some of those qualities.
Exactly. And his example raises an important question.
Yeah.
Even if we can't achieve Plato's vision perfectly, can we still learn from it?
Right.
Can we strive to cultivate those qualities of wisdom, justice, and selfless service in our own leaders?
Yeah.
And even in ourselves?
I think that's a really crucial takeaway. Like
Yeah.
going back to that painter analogy.
Yeah.
We may never actually find that perfectly beautiful man, but
Right.
striving for that ideal can still elevate our standards and inspire us to create something better.
Absolutely. And maybe that's the real legacy of Plato's philosopher king.
Okay.
It's this challenge, this provocation to think differently about what leadership could be
Right.
and about what qualities truly matter.
Instead of looking for that one perfect ruler,
Right.
maybe it's about looking for those qualities in all of our leaders and even in ourselves.
It's about cultivating wisdom, justice, and a genuine desire to serve something larger than ourselves.
Yeah.
And those are aspirations that we can all embrace regardless of our role in society.
That's a really powerful thought.
Yeah.
But before we move on, I'm curious about something in this section of the Republic. Plato doesn't really address like how these philosopher kings would actually be chosen or trained. Do you have any thoughts on that?
That's where things get even more complicated.
Okay.
Plato does hint at a very rigorous education system in other parts of the Republic,
Okay.
one that focuses on developing both the mind and the character.
Yeah.
But that's probably a deep dive for another day.
Okay, we'll put that on the list.
Yeah.
But for now, I think we've given our listeners a lot to ponder.
Yeah.
This whole idea of philosopher kings.
Yeah.
It's provocative, challenging, but ultimately I think it pushes us to think critically about what we want from our leaders and from ourselves. So where do we even go from here? We spent all this time talking about these philosopher kings. It's intriguing. It's a little bit unsettling. But like, how does it actually relate to us in our lives today?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
We may not have actual philosopher kings walking around, but I do think that Plato's ideas can offer some valuable insights into the kind of leadership
Right.
that we need in the world today.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like holding up a mirror
Yes.
to our own expectations of leadership, right?
Absolutely.
What do we actually value in our leaders?
Yes.
Are we looking for wisdom, integrity,
Right.
this genuine commitment to the common good,
Right.
or are we settling for something less?
And even if we never find that perfect leader that embodies Plato's ideal, I think that striving for those qualities can still make a real difference.
Yeah.
It's about setting a higher bar,
Yeah.
both for those in positions of authority and for ourselves.
Because ultimately, we're all leaders in some way, whether it's in our families or communities or even in our workplaces.
Exactly. And Plato's ideas, they challenge us to think about what kind of leaders we want to be. Are we driven by self-interest
Right.
or by a desire to serve something larger than ourselves?
Right.
Are we willing to question assumptions, to think critically,
Yeah.
to make those difficult decisions that may not be popular, but are ultimately, the right thing to do?
It's a lot to think about.
It is.
But I think that's a point of a deep dive like this, right? It's about grappling with these big questions, exploring different perspectives,
Yeah.
and maybe coming away with a little bit deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
And even if we don't arrive at definitive answers, the
Yeah.
journey itself is valuable.
Right.
Because as Plato reminds us, the pursuit of wisdom is a lifelong endeavor. It's about constantly questioning, learning,
Yeah.
and striving to become better versions of ourselves.
Well said. And on that note, I think we've given our listeners a lot to chew on today.
Yeah.
We've explored Plato's, radical idea of these philosopher kings,
Right.
a concept that's been sparking debate for centuries.
Yeah.
We delved into the qualities that make a philosopher, their
Yeah.
unique way of thinking, and their potential for leadership.
And while we may never see a perfect philosopher king in the real world, I think the ideals that are embodied in this concept can serve as a guiding light, a reminder that leadership at its best is about wisdom, justice, and a deep commitment to the common good.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's leave our listeners with a final thought.
Yeah.
What if we all embraced this challenge, to cultivate those qualities in ourselves, to demand more from our leaders, and to strive for a world where wisdom and justice prevail?
It's a tall order,
Yeah.
but one worth pursuing because, as Plato reminds us, the pursuit of a better world begins with each of us.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Plato's Republic.
Yeah,
Hopefully you found it insightful, thought-provoking, and maybe even a little bit inspiring.
absolutely.
Until next time, keep those minds curious, keep those questions coming, and keep those philosophical fires burning.
Yeah.